Dun, dun, dun. And good morning, everybody. It's Friday. Congratulations. You made it through the week. And if you're here with me, my name is Brian Armitra with the Food Leadership Group. And what you have tuned into is the Food Safety Chat Live. This is a live stream we do on LinkedIn and YouTube every Friday to talk about subjects of interest to the food industry. And part of what's fun about this is I bring an expert on every week. And this week we have Rod Wheeler, the founder of the Global Food Defense Institute. How you doing today, my friend?
Pretty good, Brian. Thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure to join you. I mean, there's no better way to spend your Fridays in the fall other than with the food safety chat. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. When you're on, it's always an amazing show. So super glad to have you here.
Thank you.
If you're new to the chat, first off, please jump in the chat and let us know where you're from. So as I'm out here in Loveland, Colorado, and Rod is in Maryland, beautiful Maryland. And I lived in Pennsylvania. I used to go down and fly out of BWI quite a bit. I lived in Lancaster. I loved that drive right down from York down the high. I forget what interstate it was, but gorgeous. That's kind of bugging now.
Interstate 83. You brought all the way to the airport.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah, beautiful area. Today here in Colorado, we're having really gorgeous weather. It's going to be 78 degrees here today.
Oh, wow.
And it was weird. What's that?
I said, lucky you. Lucky for the Coloradans, right?
Well, it's weird, right? If you're not familiar with Colorado and things like this is the time of year where you'll have gorgeous weather like this, and then it'll snow. And we haven't had the snow part yet. So we're anytime now it could show up, and you get dusting on the ground and it's gone, but it kind of gives you that warning that it's coming. And out here, unlike the East Coast, when I lived in Pennsylvania, right, it snows and it just keeps accumulating through the year. Out here, it tends to snow and melt, and actually, the majority of the snow comes in March and April. And so you think, it's weird, huh? You think you're through winter, you're like, cool, right? And you get these storms that come up from the Gulf, and they spin counterclockwise, and they come in on the east of the mountains, and they hit the mountains, and then they just sit there and they just dump snow. So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. Good morning, Sebastian in Montreal, beautiful city as well. Chris, good to see you in Rochester. So I lived in Buffalo for a while. So Chris is familiar with, I'm sure, the Golden Snowball, Golden Snowball Award. That was between Rochester, Syracuse, and Buffalo, right? For the dubious honor of the most snow. Andrea in Atlanta, beautiful city as well. Spent some time there too. So with the food safety chat, if you're new to this, what you're going to notice is this is not a presentation. This is a discussion. And this is your opportunity to ask some questions of an expert and really get in there and figure things out, because in food safety and food defense in these areas, right, we all benefit from the knowledge that we gain from each other because we're in it all together. And it's not a competitive advantage, right? If one industry suffers a hit in a particular area, we all feel the pain in the mind of the consumer. So that's kind of a brief summary on that. But today is a really cool topic, right? And it's food tampering, right? And it seems like these issues kind of bubble up every now and then. And it seems like too, Rod, when one happens, you kind of have like copycats or a string of them, right? It always seems like there's more than one, which is always kind of weird.
You're exactly right, Brian. And, I'll tell you, food tampering issues happen from time to time, as you indicated. And one of the things that I've noticed over many, many years of doing what I do, which is investigations, one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of us in the food industry, or a lot of my colleagues in the food industry, they really haven't had much training when it comes to how to conduct their own internal investigation for potential tampering incident or issue. So we're going to kind of talk about that today a little bit in our chat. But you haven't asked me about my favorite cup this morning like you usually do. What's wrong with you,
dude? I always just get so excited to get into these topics and I forget.
I love that. I did my internship as a police officer at the Ohio State University, where I did my undergrad. That's where I did my internship, and they gave me a police cup, and I've had my police cup for years. So this doesn't mean I can go out and arrest people, though.
And a true Ohio State alumnus, because it's the Ohio State, right? And I think they copyrighted that too recently, didn't they?
That's right, they did. That's right. It even makes your coffee taste better.
Wow, I'm gonna have to get a mug. Hi, good morning, Marcel. Good morning, Becky. Nice to see you. So, what's interesting as we dive into this topic too is that there's some real parallels between crisis management for food recalls too, right? And I think that kind of gets into the first thing that we're talking about here is determining, right, if a product tampering case has occurred, how are you going to handle it? So, I just picture I'm sitting in my office. I'm the quality manager in a production facility, and someone pops their head in the, they're, why does it go? So they're saying, Brian, we got a big problem. And I'm like, well, what's up? Right. We think our product was tampered with. Right. And then panic. Right. Right. So how and when do you determine if a case should be handled? How do you even begin? I mean, geez.
That's right. Well, the way that you would do this is, first of all, you have to have a plan in place to deal with these types of situations. Now, that tampering response plan or that emergency incident plan, whatever you want to call it, can be part of your crisis management plan, Brian. And that's why when you just mentioned crisis management, you were spot on, because this all falls under crisis management. And as you know, with the food defense course that I teach, a huge section of that deals with crisis management. How do we deal with the situation when that manager or that supervisor pops his or her head in your office and says, guess what? We have a problem. We think something has happened to our product, or we believe someone has tampered with our product. What do you do at that point? You got a lot of critical decisions to make, such as, do you notify your customers right away? And I'm sure many people would say, no, not right away. Let's do our investigation. But then I would say to you as an investigator, how long would that investigation, or how long could it potentially take to do that investigation, which could take weeks, it could take days, it could even take months. So do you hold off from notifying your customers? The other question that comes to mind is, do you notify the FDA right away? What if the product has been tampered with and it has gone out to commerce? What do you do? Do you notify your customers right away? And do you notify the media? Do you call the police? All of these things come into play. And I'll tell you, Brian, over many, many years of conducting investigations, many in the food industry, one of the things that I'm always astounded to learn is that when I get that telephone call, and sometimes I do get that call at 3 a.m. from a food plant, and they'll say, we got an issue. We need to get you here right now because we don't know what to do. And I totally get that. And so that's why I said, it's very, very important, if you will, that management, senior management, someone on their team needs to understand how to conduct the investigation, how to begin the investigation, and the things to do versus the things not to do in the immediacy of an investigation or a tampering incident.
So generally with the best programs then, Rod, do you find that there's, like a group of people who are doing the investigation, and then there's one person in charge who's kind of leading it, like a coordinator, or what's the best configuration of that team?
Yeah, usually there is someone that's going to head up the investigation internally, and that's going to be the person that's going to collect all of the evidence, all of the statements, all of the information pertaining to what has happened. That's going to be your central person, but typically it's going to be a team of people. And usually, Brian, it's the crisis team members that's going to be heading up this investigation and going out doing the legwork. Now, here's something that a lot of your viewers may be wondering. Well, how soon do we notify outside authorities, such as the local police or the state police or the FBI or these types of folks? Well, a lot of people have that question, and here's the answer. Depending upon the severity of the adulteration, if you know for a fact that your product has been adulterated and product has gone out to commerce, to consumers, then obviously you need to notify your Department of Public Health in your community. That's always step one. As a matter of fact, you might want to make that note. Always notify your local Department of Public Health first. That could be in your county, that could be in your city, that could be in your state. The second person I would say to notify, in my opinion, again, from doing this many, many years, is the state police versus the local city police. Now, a lot of people may say, well, why is that? There's a good reason why. And I've done this many, many times with tampering cases. State police agencies, believe it or not, many state police agencies have someone on staff that's familiar with the food industry and has worked with the Department of Agriculture within that state, and they have the resources more than your local police department. Now, sometimes the state police may say, well, notify your local police first, and then they will call us at the state. And that's fine. You can do that. Basically, what's going to happen is the local police will come out, they'll do a face sheet or a report, and then they'll just notify the state police. But either way, that's what you would want to do when you know for a fact that you have, adulteration to your product. Now, let's say you're not sure if your product has been adulterated and you want to conduct your own investigation before getting outside involvement. Well, that's what you can do as well. But there's steps that you need to take in order to do that.
Okay. So like, so I'm thinking of two scenarios and Rod, get your opinion on this. So yeah, you're in the plant and HR comes to you and says, hey, we've got a disgruntled employee that we just fired. And he said that he did something to the product, but we're not sure he did. Right. Sure. Or you get an anonymous phone call from what sounds like a teenager who says, ha, 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 I was in the grocery store and I messed with your product, and they hang up the phone, right? Yeah. So you're not really sure if you really have an issue or not.
Right. And so you want to start your own internal investigation. Now, let's go back to your first scenario where you have the disgruntled employee. You want to try to get as much information as you can from people that perhaps knew that disgruntled employee. But when you get the information, and obviously we don't have a lot of time on the call this morning, but you want to get statements. You want to try to get written statements if you can from as many people involved if you can. Now, why written statements? Because some people are going to fabricate some information, and you're going to need to go back and verify that some of that information that they're giving you is true. But you want to get as many statements as you can. One question that always comes up as well, Brian, is can we get an audible statement? Can we just record someone's statement? The answer is yes. You can, but just keep in mind, in order to record someone's statement, it's better in most states to ask that person on the recording, is it okay to record you? And they need to answer yes or no, not or because that's going to be challenged in court, believe it or not.
Yeah.
You want them to answer yes or no. Is it okay to record you? And then you want to ask that person whether or not they're under the influence of any drugs or alcohol or anything like that. Because whatever statement they give you, whether it's in writing or whether it's an audible statement, it's going to be challenged at some point if that statement is used against someone else.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's what the defense lawyer's job is to destroy that credibility.
That's
and
right.
So something I've always heard, and I'll be curious to get your law enforcement background and all of your work in this area, is that testimony of witnesses is really hard, right? It's generally very unreliable. So this is a good technique, right? People forget or people will embellish a story. So that's some really, really good advice.
Absolutely. I mean, the statement, there's a lot of reasons, first of all, why you want to get a written statement if you can from someone. Now, someone may not have the ability to write too well. We understand that. Then in that case, you might want to get an audible statement. But if they can give you a written statement, that's great. Now, let's say you have a person that you suspect, and this is interesting, folks. Let's say you have a person that you suspect may be the one behind this alleged tampering incident. Can you ask them questions? Yes, you can. You don't have to worry about reading them rights or anything like that because you are not a sworn
law enforcement officer. Yeah.
Some people will bring that up, though. They're going to say, well, you got to read me my rights if you're accusing me. If you're not a sworn police officer or a law enforcement officer, don't worry about having to read somebody their rights. No. The only thing you need to worry about, though, from a company standpoint, is making sure that you cross your T's and dot your I's when it comes to doing what's legal. You never want to be accusatory. And this is good information, Brian, for our audience here. You never want to be accusatory. You never want to say to someone, well, I know you did this because.
Right.
You never want to, don't get to that point with someone that you think may have tampered with your product. That's why, and this is another good point, you never want to call your discussions with individuals an interrogation. Okay. Never call in an interrogation. Call in an interview. If you would, if you want, you can call in an administrative interview. Now, some people may be saying, what difference does it make? Believe it or not, it makes a huge difference. If I'm having an interview with you versus I'm interrogating you. Why? Because the word interrogation has the idea that you're being accused. A lot of people, when you say I'm interrogating you, it feels like you're being accused. But if I'm interviewing you, if we're having a chat, if we're having a discussion, and that's kind of how you want to write it down. Let's say someone confesses to you that, yes, I did tamper with the product, right? This is a good point here, folks. Ask them, why did they do it? Okay. They may say that they did it, but you always want to ask them, why did they do it? And you always want to get them to put that in writing. That is huge. Why? Because let's say you decide to prosecute the person for tampering with your product after they've told you that they've done it. Well, once they get an attorney, believe you me, and I've been down this road many, many times, that statement's going to change. I didn't
Yeah.
tell you that. But see, if you have the reason why they did it and you can show the reason what they say is true, a lot of times people will say, well, I didn't get a pay raise. Okay, well, that's the reason why you did this. Then now you can show that they did not get a pay raise. So it kind of makes sense why they did what they did. And that's going to help in the case if you do decide to prosecute.
Wow. Wow. So obviously, if I suspect somebody, so let's say you suspect me of something at the plant, you can't throw me in a room and say, all right, you sit here, you can't leave, right? You can't detain. You don't have the authority to, if that person wants to leave, obviously they can leave, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're going to want to leave if they want to leave. And that's why it's so important that you kind of know how to conduct the interview. I do have a course that I offer twice a year. It's for the food industry, how to conduct tampering interviews at food plants. I only offer it twice a year, but it's usually sold out. And I teach it along with two other investigators. And we teach people how to have these, what I like to call soft interviews with people. But some of the techniques really, really work. You'd be surprised. I'm thinking about a case that I had one time real quickly, Brian, where I had a guy who was going to interview him for allegedly leaving a note. And the note said that the product had been tampered with. Plant management believed this particular guy did it, right? So I said, okay, I'll interview the guy. Now, let me just share this with the audience because this is good information. If you do decide to interview someone, you want to have a witness present, okay? Write that down. That's so important, folks. And again, we don't have a lot of time, but there's a good reason why you always want to have a witness present. Now, your witness should always sit behind the person that you're interviewing. In other words, if I'm interviewing you, Brian, and I'm sitting in front of you, I don't want my witness right beside me. There's a reason for that. You want the witness behind the person that you're interviewing. Here's something else that you won't get anywhere else but on Brian's food safety chat. If you don't take notes when the person is talking to you, your witness takes the notes. Yes. Now, some people may say, why can't you take the notes? Here's a good reason why. If I'm interviewing you and I'm taking notes while you're talking, you know what that's going to do to the individual that you're talking to? That's going to make them clam up. Right. Because they're going to see you're writing down everything they're saying. So they're going to be cautious in terms of what they tell you. So you don't want to have anything in your hands, right?
Well, yeah. And plus, if you're looking down at the paper and writing stuff, you're not looking at them and you can't read their body language.
Absolutely. That's another reason too. But that's why you want your witness to take the notes and see if your witness is in the room with them and the notes that the witness take is just as good as the notes that you take.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, the person that you're talking to, they're not thinking about what the witness is doing. They're not paying attention to the witness. Why? Because the witness is sitting behind them. That's why you want the witness behind them.
Wow. Wow. If you tune in for this food safety chat and you only get one thing out of this, which is impossible, but if you only get one thing, that right there is amazing. And as you're talking about that too, that parallels what I learned for crisis management for recalls, right? Is if you're the recall coordinator, you always have a person who is documenting and writing down all the activities that are taking place. You shouldn't be doing that. So that's the same. Wow. So with your website here, myfooddefense.com, if people are interested in this course, then can they go there and sign up for your next offering?
Yes, they can. I can tell you that I offer the course usually in the month of March and in the month of November. We're not giving it this November. We're just kind of getting, caught back up because of COVID, but the next course will be in March. One other thing too, Brian, while I'm thinking about it, that's really, really important for your audience to know, that witness that you have in the room, that person is critical. But if you're a male and you're interviewing a female, always have a female witness in the room with you. So important, folks. You may say, well, we're not going to do anything. I believe you. You know what I mean? You got to have, if you're a male and you're interviewing a female, have a female witness. If you're a female and you're interviewing a male, you can still have a female or a male witness. It doesn't matter. But it just really matters that you have a female in the room with you. You never want to interview as a male, a female in a room with the door closed at all. If you can, have a camera in that room. It could just be a general camera recording everything. I mean, these are the things that you have to think about because believe it or not, they're going to come up at some point, especially if you decide to go down the prosecutorial route.
Right. Well, I think this circles back too, Rod, to a very important point you made at the beginning. You have to have your procedure created and ready. There's no way if this is happening real time, you're going to remember all this stuff, right? You have to have a procedure and a process, and you need to practice it as well.
You do need to practice it. You know, you talked a little bit about body language. I like to call that neurolinguistics. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the course that I offer. I teach as part of the investigations course, how to read body language. You would be surprised as to what you can learn from a person's body language. If they don't even open their mouth, you can learn so much from that individual just by some of the things that they do. Real quickly, let me give you an example. And your audience, if you don't know this, you'll probably be like, wow. You know, if you're interviewing a person and you ask them certain questions, and let's say they go for a few times, clear their throat for about 5 seconds. See, that means something to the interviewee. That means something to the investigator, okay? Because why is it that when you ask certain questions, they're clearing their throat? There's a reason for that. You know what they're doing? They're buying time. Buying time so that they can think about their response. Most people don't even think about that, right? Yeah. I remember about 2 years ago, I was at the SQF conference, and I think it was down in Orlando, and I put a course on interviewing and conducting tampering investigations. And I called out a person randomly from the audience, right? I'll never forget this. The room was packed with everybody wanting to see how I did this, right? And the guy came up front, and I started asking him just some general questions about things. And he kind of got a little nervous, and he started going, and then the audience started laughing because he automatically did it because he was buying time. The other thing people will do is take a drink of water before they respond. There's a reason why people take a drink of water before they respond. The reason is because typically their mouth is dry. Okay? And your mouth, believe it or not, gets dry when you're about to tell a lie. You know that? Your mouth gets dry when you're about to. So what they have to do is they have to see, as the investigator, you're going to notice these things. Now, it's not 100% science, obviously. Right. You know, somebody just could be thirsty. But these are little things that you notice. If you ask a person a question and they look up, that means something. If you ask a person a question and they look down, that means something. If a person crosses their leg from right to left, that means something. If they cross their leg from left to right, that means something. If someone crosses their arms, that's right. That means something. If they put their hands on their hips, that means something.
Or leans in, points. I mean,
absolutely. Wow. All of these things mean something, and this is what you can learn. I'm not trying to make, criminal investigators out of our food safety people, but these are little things that you can do if you really want to conduct your own internal investigation before you get the experts involved.
Wow, fascinating. I mean, yeah. So I've always heard too on the body language side. I did this a little earlier, right? I kind of scratched my nose a little bit, right? You're looking more for sudden changes in behavior, right? If scratching nose could just be, to your point, just scratching your nose. But if there's a sudden change in a direct response to your question, it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to pay attention to that.
If you hear a person make a statement that's absolute, you sometimes hear people say, I swear to you. Oh. No. No one swears anything these days. That could be another indication. All of these things combined, you want to look at, not just one individual thing. So person scratched their nose, you can't say, oh my God, they're lying. No, not necessarily so. Maybe their nose itched, like you said. But when you look collectively at all of these things, now you're actually ready to go down a certain path.
Wow. Yeah, I've always, so whatever I'm thinking automatically comes to my face. And my boss had figured this out. And so he was smart enough to look at my body language to figure out my reaction to the thing. I never had to say a word. So he'd be like, hey, Brian, I've got this idea and I'm doing this. And he would be telling me what he wanted to implement. And I would involuntarily just kind of go, right, or something like that. And he was smart enough to stop. And he'd be like, what? And I'd be like, well, I have a question, right? It's amazing how useful this is in everything you do.
That's right. It really is. And it's little things like this that can really help you in the early stages of an investigation. But speaking of the early stages of an investigation, when you first learn or you first suspect that your product has been tampered with, don't share that information with the entire team. Maybe your crisis team, maybe your emergency management team, but not the entire staff at the facility. The less information, folks, that you share with others, the better. Why? Because you don't want people to start preparing an alibi. Because if they know what you know, then they have an excellent opportunity to start preparing an alibi. If you have evidence, for example, if somebody left a note, you don't want to take that note around the plant and say, does anybody know who wrote this? You don't want to do that. The less information you share with others, the better.
Well, yeah, it's kind of funny, right? Because as you know, I have zero law enforcement and investigation experience, but you pick up things from like watching shows like Law and Order, right? And so when the police are investigating a crime and they're interviewing potential witnesses or suspects, right? It's always one at a time, right? Because they don't want that person knowing what another person said, so they can sync up their stories.
Absolutely. It's always one at a time. You don't ever want to be in the room. You want to try to be in, if you talk about the setting, right, for a minute, there's a way that you want to have the room set up even. You don't want to just be like in the lunchroom or the break room where everybody's walking around. You don't want any of that. You don't want any distractions whatsoever. You actually want a room that has no windows, right? So you want it to be a closed environment. Is that your dog?
Yeah, that's our little crazy Yorkie. Yep, making his presence known.
I love dogs, but yeah, so you want to be in an environment where there's no distractions whatsoever. You don't want people coming in and out. You don't want telephones ringing. That's another point. If you're interviewing someone, make sure everybody has their phone on silent, okay? Because that could be a distraction. Why is that important? Because you could be right at that point in your interview where that person is about to confess to something, and then the telephone rings. That breaks everything for you, because now that person has a chance to sit back and think about what their response is going to be.
Right. Well, and that's
so I'm
curious about your thoughts on this too. One of the things that you see a lot on these investigation shows too is they always circle back, right? And it's like, well, tell me that story again. Well, I already told you that story. Well, I want to hear it again, right? Looking for inconsistencies.
Absolutely. The same way with the statement. And that's why it's so important to get a statement as early as you possibly can, because what's going to happen is, there's an old saying that if you tell the truth, you don't have to worry about a lie.
Yeah.
For being called a liar. Because you don't really forget the truth. But what you do forget is the lie. Which lie did I tell? You know what I mean? So you always want to try to get that person to put whatever statement they want to give in writing initially. Because it's going to make a difference down the road. And now that we like to say in law enforcement, you've captured that statement. So it's no turning back from that statement. This is what they said. You know what I mean? And they can say down the road, well, I didn't mean that. That's fine. But that's for a judge or a jury to decide. This is what you said at the time. See, that's why it's so important, as I mentioned earlier, Brian, that if somebody does confess to something, you ask them, why did they do it? So let me share this real quick story with you guys. To kind of illustrate just that point there. So I got a call from a company in Nashville, Tennessee, and this was about 4 or 5 years ago. And the company said, we went to deliver a truck load of liquid yeast to a particular customer. And when the driver got there, the driver started unloading the yeast. It was in a tanker truck. It was liquid yeast, right? Okay. And what happened was the driver noticed that the port where the hose hooks up to the tanker truck, it was leaking. It started leaking right there. Well, when it starts leaking, that's an indication that something is blocking the flow of the product into the tank, right? So the driver shut it off and he looked at it. And what happens is there's a mesh, and you guys are all familiar with this in food safety. There's a wire mesh that's designed to capture little things that may come through the port. But anyway, he shut it off. They drained the tanker, and guess what? There was 2 huge handfuls of broken glass in the liquid yeast tanker.
Wow.
Now, that wasn't a food safety issue. That was a food defense issue. 2 huge handfuls of glass. Somebody intentionally, remember that's the key word there, somebody intentionally put this glass over into that liquid yeast tanker. So the customer obviously was livid because this yeast was going to go into a major national brand product, right, that I'll never mention. And so anyway, they contacted me and they wanted me to come out and do an investigation to see who could have done this. Now, this is good information, folks. Whenever you do an investigation, work backwards. Okay. You want to work backwards. What do I mean by that? You don't want to make any assumptions as to who could have done X, Y, and Z. You never want to start at the beginning and work forward. Always work backwards. So in this particular case, I'm going to start at the point with the driver who actually determined or found that this tanker contained glass. I interviewed that driver. I'll make this very quick. I interviewed that driver. He was a 72-year-old man, and I did my due diligence. I did his background check and all that kind of stuff to see if he had any previous similar incidents like this, because you got to rule him out, right? So anyway, I interviewed him, and then I went to the location where they actually loaded the tanker truck. And there I talked to everybody that was involved in it. You want to review all the paperwork, and that's why it's so important that your customers and your own companies maintain all of your paperwork. Now, keep this in mind, too. This is so important. All of your paperwork for everything you do in the food industry is subject to subpoena. Okay? So don't think, when you write something down, oh, nobody's going to ever see this. No, everything, depending upon the situation, it could be subject to subpoena. And somebody may have the right, some court may want to see that document, right? So just keep that in mind, folks. That is so important. So anyway, I interviewed everybody at that location, and then I said, okay, I'm not getting anywhere here. But now there's one other step with these tanker trucks. They have to be washed before they're loaded. And there is a procedure, as everybody knows, that you do before you load a tanker truck. So I go to the truck wash. And one of the things I noticed is that when you have a tanker truck wash, this is standard for all companies, you have to seal that tanker truck before it goes to the location, right, to where it's going to be filled. Yeah. But when you seal, you have to write the seal numbers down on a truck wash sheet or a ticket, right? I noticed that one of the seal numbers, this is interesting, folks, and this was a real case, like I said, in Nashville, Tennessee. One of the seal numbers had been scratched out and a new seal number written in. Now, that's interesting as an investigator. Why? Because your first question is, why was the original seal number scratched out and a new seal number put on? Now, anytime you have a document that's an official document and you scratch something out or you put a line through it, what else should you have on that document, Brian?
Your initials and your date that you did that.
Your initials and your date, exactly. And some companies even require that you write the reason for the change on the document, okay? But you're exactly right, at least initial it and the date. Well, this didn't have either of those. It was just scratched out and a new seal number put on. Now, that particular seal number was for the seal that was on the top hatch for the tanker truck. Interesting. So come to find out that that seal was changed. Now, that's where I believe the glass went into the tanker, because someone took that original seal off, opened it up, put the glass in the tanker, and then put a new seal on. Who could that have been? Well, maybe it was the person who washed the tanker truck. So I decided to interview this guy. So I called over to the truck wash, and I told the manager at the truck wash, I said, the guy's name was Charles. I said, have Charles meet me at the plant at 10 o'clock tomorrow, but don't tell Charles when you call him that I'm coming to interview him. You don't want Charles to know. Why? Why don't I want Charles to know he's coming to talk to an investigator?
Gives him time to put his alibi together.
Or not show up.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'll get sick all of a sudden. That's the way it works. That's the way it works. Can't come in. I got the flu, right? All right. So anyway, the manager said, okay, Rod, I won't tell Charles that you're coming to investigate him. And I said, you haven't told him anything about this yet, right? The manager said, no, I haven't told him. I'll watch CSI. I know how this goes. I said, okay, great. The guy said, right? He wants CSI. Great. So the next day at 10 a.m., I'm there. And I'm waiting on Charles, and the manager said he hasn't arrived yet. I said, okay, is he usually on time to work? He said he's always on time. Okay, no problem. Maybe he's running a little late. 10:30 rolls around, no Charles. Now I'm becoming a little suspicious. Why is Charles running late all of a sudden when he's always on time? 10:45 rolls around, no Charles. 11 o'clock, here comes Charles. So I'm sitting down with Charles in the room, and I asked Charles, I told him who I was, and I said, do you know why I'm here? And you know what Charles said? He said, yes. I said, how do you know? He said, you're here to investigate the glass in the tanker truck. I said, well, how do you know? He said, oh, the manager told me. That's the way it works. Okay. So to make a long story short, I got to talking to Charles, and there's a way I did the interview. I had a witness there with me, and Charles eventually, he broke down and he confessed that he did put the glass in the liquid yeast tanker. Yep. And unfortunately, he told me why he did it too. And see, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, because this actually came up. We prosecuted Charles. He actually got 8 years. Wow. He got 8 years for product tampering in the state. We went through the state route. The other reason you want to go through the state route, because there's better penalties, believe it or not. He got 8 years, but the reason he said he did it is because he didn't get a raise that he was promised at the truck wash. He said he didn't intend for anybody to be harmed, but he wanted the truck wash to lose the contract with their customer. Wow. Well, you can't do that. You can't do that. He confessed, and he got 8 years, and he probably winded up doing maybe 2 or 3 on good behavior and got out, because that was a serious issue. So that's a classic example as to how we did that investigation, and how, you want to lock a person into their statement. Initially, of course, Charles denied all knowledge, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. And a person is going to do that. They're going to say, I know nothing about what you're talking about, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But you want to keep going, and then eventually that person will come around.
Yeah. What's interesting in that story too that I noticed is that whoever this was who did this knew enough about the process to understand the wash tickets and the importance of the seals, right? This wasn't just somebody who came in off the street and threw something in, right? They knew the process.
Exactly. Sure. And again, as an investigator, I'm thinking that whoever did this had to know the process, right?
Yeah.
It goes back to that case I was telling you about the last time we had our chat about the ice cream with the razor blades. Yeah. Remember that case I was telling you about, the 15 half-gallon cartons of ice cream that contain multiple razor blades in California? We solved that case, and the only reason we were able to solve that case is because whoever did that had to know the process in order to get those razor blades past the foreign object detectors. They had to. Otherwise, the foreign object detectors would have detected it.
Exactly. So in the case with the glass in the tanker, so you're doing your investigation. This took a little bit of time. So what was going on with the police during all of this, with the state and these type of things? Did they interject themselves, or I'm kind of curious on that?
No. Good question. Most police departments, whether it's local or state, unless you got a real solid case, they're not going to put a lot of resources behind it, Brian. They're just not. They don't have the resources to come out and do unless people are getting sick, dying, or something like that, they're not going to put a lot of resources behind it. They're going to expect you to do your own internal investigation. And that's why it's so important that you have my name on your speed dial. In case something happens, you want to be associated and have your company associated with an experienced investigator, somebody who knows how to do these things, and especially know the food industry, because it really makes a difference. Now, like I said, if people are getting sick, dying, and things like that, then they will get involved. Now, the FDA does have an Office of Criminal Investigation, and I know a number of those folks over there, and they really do good work. But I'll tell you, they're swamped, believe it or not. The Office of Criminal Investigation is swamped, and I talk to those folks regularly, and they always tell me, Rod, any cases you bring us, great, we're going to take it, because they know I'm going to do what needs to be done to get the case moving. But they get calls all the time for things, and a lot of them don't pan out. But, they just don't have the resources to go all over the country every day trying to look at a personal company's, an individual company's situation. So a lot of times the company is responsible for at least conducting their own investigation. There's a company in Pennsylvania, they have 28 food plants, and they have a home corporate office. This happened 2 years ago, and I have the audio tape. Someone called their plant and said that their product had been contaminated at one of their 28 plants in one of their storage bins. Click. Oh. And hung up the phone. So what do you do? You call your local cops or what? The cops are going to come out. They're going to take a report, and they're going to probably say, you know, if you learn anything else, let us know, or contact your insurance company, which, by the way, a lot of insurance providers contact me as well on behalf of their companies, because insurance providers want to know, you know, what went on, because they're going to have to pay something out. They want to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Right. Interesting. Wow. So, I mean, so the analogy I was thinking of in my head, Rod, is so you leave your bicycle out in front of your house, right? And someone steals it. And you call the cops, like, hey, somebody stole my bike. And the cop on the line is like, okay, great. Did you see it? Do you have video? You know, that's, and you're like, no, I don't know. I don't have anything. I just, you know, my bike's gone. You know, the police are going to be like, oh, okay, well, good luck. Right. You have to provide you have to help out law enforcement, right? You have to give them the information they need to do their jobs. So that's a huge point.
You're right, Brian. And actually, in most police departments now, if you call and report your bike being stolen, they'll forward your call to the telephone reporting unit. We call it TRU, and it's a recording. Thank you for calling your local police. Please report your crime at the sound of the tone. You know, and you have to leave this information, your report number, and then they give you a report number and they tell you, contact your insurance company. If you get any additional information, call us back with this reference number, this control number, or whatever. And that's it. That's as far as they don't even send anybody out anymore. Nobody goes out for stolen anything half the time these days. I mean, look at what's happening around the country. And my point is, it's not to be negative, but the police departments around this country are really overwhelmed. I mean, we all know, not to be political, but crime is out of control. And there's so many things going on, and our police departments are really swamped. So if a company has the ability to at least begin their own investigation, it really would help a lot when it comes time to notify the police, because it would give them a leg up, if you will, in terms of their investigation.
Right. And then, you're going to move to the front of the line because they have something they can actually take action against.
Exactly. That's right. Yep. And you know, they don't have to waste time doing the preliminary stuff. And that's why companies can do a lot of these things themselves, Brian. And that's why, you know, having that investigation course that I put on has really proved to be helpful. If you come to the investigation course, you'll hear a story about a guy named Reggie out of New Jersey. And it'll be a story that you'll never forget your entire life. I guarantee it. I've been talking about this story with Reggie for at least 10, 15 years. And to this day, people still come up to me and say, I never forgot about that case involving Reggie. You'll never forget it. But you only can get that if you come to my course.
You know, I'm going to your courses. And I mean, so part of this, right, is that for quality people, right, it's why we do gap assessments and these type of things. When we find an area where our knowledge isn't quite up to where we want it to be, it's exciting, right? And you've really opened my eyes in this call. Right? There's a lot of things here I need to learn a lot about. And thank you, right? This is really, really good. So what other resources are out there for investigating in-house? What else? What other recommendations do you have?
Sure. There's a lot of resources, and a lot of resources online that companies can go to kind of start their own investigations. For example, you know, a lot of times in my food defense courses, I talk about the FDA's BART listing, debarment listing. I call it the BART listing, debarment listing. Have you seen that listing, Brian?
Yes, I have.
Yep. You know, it's not a bad place to start your investigation. At least look at some of those cases. Now, with the debarment listing, a lot of those cases are civil. They're not criminal, but there are some that are criminal. And so you definitely want to at least look at that. Now, that's the FDA's debarment listing for those that may be writing it down. It's the FDA's debarment listing. Just Google it, FDA debarment listing. Now, I got to tell you, when you Google it, you're going to get pages that's going to say $14.95. No, this is an open source database. Don't pay for it. But there's people that sell that data, but it's free on the FDA's website. But a lot of folks don't look at the FDA's debarment list. I'll tell you a couple of more lists you want to look at. The USDA has a debarment listing as well. You want to look at the USDA's debarment listing. And then there's another one that you look at. It's called the OFAC list, Office of Financial Accounting and Controls, OFAC. You know, we like to say in law enforcement, follow the money and you follow the terrorists.
Yeah.
So you see, just look at the names on there, and you can actually search for names on there. If you got anything that you think is suspicious, just run the person's name through it. Again, don't pay for these listings. They're open source databases. Anytime you hear the word open source database, that means it's free. And a lot of these listings are free from the government, but there's people that package them and sell them as a package, which you can do if you want, but you don't have to. My point is you don't have to. If you go to the Social Security Administration website, you can run a person's Social Security number in that website to see whether or not it's a valid Social Security number. So go to SSN Validator. SSN Validator. If you Google SSN Validator, you'll get pages and pages that's going to say we can check a Social Security number for $14.95. Don't pay $14.95.
Oh,
It's free. I'm telling you. Okay, you could go straight to the U.S. Social Security Administration's website. You put any Social Security number in, and what it will tell you is the following: the date and year in which it was issued, the state in which issued it, and whether or not that Social Security number is still active and valid. So if a person gives you a bogus Social Security number, and there's at least 20 of them I know of, okay, long story, but you can use one of these 20 bogus Social Security numbers to start a new credit life, believe it or not.
wow.
But anyway, if a person gives you a bogus Social Security number, that SSN validator will flag it. It won't tell you the person's name. Obviously, it can't give you that information, but it will tell you the state in which it was issued, the year it was issued, and whether or not it's a valid Social Security number, and also if that person is deceased. So let's say that Social Security number belonged to someone that passed away. It will tell you the years in which it was active. And if it's no longer active, typically that means that person is deceased. Why is that important? Because for a long time, we used to see scammers, and we're seeing so much scam these days. That's another food safety chat about just the general scams, Brian, that's going on around the world. It's unbelievable, but people used to steal. What people used to do is search the obituary columns in the newspapers, and they would look for people that had just passed away, and they would try to get their Social Security number. Because see, here in the United States, if you can get someone's Social Security number that just passed away within 30 days, you can start a new credit file for that person. Wow. Because what happened is, if you use that person's Social Security number, you can get credit cards and everything under that person's name. And it's going to take 30 to 45 days for the systems to catch up. And what's going to happen is the surviving family members will start getting these new bills. And then they're going to say, wait a minute, how can this be? Well, that's because somebody stole this person's Social Security number, and they created a new credit file.
You're scaring the crap out of me, Rod. I got to tell you.
That's crazy. I know. It's the world we live in. We created this mess, you know.
So the FDA debarment list, the Social Security number validators, and systems like this. Have you found that companies, when they're hiring people, they're using these tools to check people out when they're applying for jobs?
Yes, they are. Yeah, a lot of companies are, and there's a lot more lists out there too. The EPA, believe it or not, the EPA, Environmental Protective Agency, they have a debarment list that I check all the time, because some of my cases involve surrounding stolen ammonia. Stolen ammonia. You know, we use ammonia sometimes in some of our food plants, as you know, Brian, for cooling, refrigeration purposes. Usually it's to keep things cold, but people steal ammonia. Why do you think people steal ammonia so much?
I'm going to guess drug manufacturing.
Yeah, meth labs.
Meth
labs, sure. And especially in rural areas. Ammonia is a big deal. So the EPA, their debarment listing, I think, is really good. I check that thing all the time, because what happened is, if you're convicted of a crime involving ammonia and things like that, typically you'll be barred from working in a facility. It's a debarment list. So you'll be barred from working in a facility that handles that type of chemical, and a lot of chemical facilities. So your name would probably be on that list. So that's the reason why I check that. And then one other thing that's really, really important these days, Brian, is fentanyl. I don't know if people realize, but fentanyl is really a national problem right now. It really is. I talked to a colleague of mine just the other day. He's heavily involved in investigating fentanyl crimes across the country. And it was really sobering talking to him because I didn't realize that fentanyl was that prevalent in some of these cities, but it really is. And we really have to take a look at this. And some of these shipments of fentanyl is coming in embedded in some truckloads of product. Some of the truckloads are food truckloads of product. That's how they're getting it into the country. But that's a problem. And so I'm putting together a course now to help companies deal with that issue on a plant basis, because it's out there. Fentanyl is out there, and it causes death if you don't know what you're doing. And it's something that people really have to start taking a look at. You've heard the federal government talk about it a lot, the opioid crisis and things like that. So you definitely want to look at that as an organization.
Yeah, a little bit of a side question, but I'm just curious. I've heard that almost all the fentanyl comes from China. Is that true?
I don't think it's true. I think a lot of it does, but I don't think all of it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Huh. So
that may have been a political statement.
We'll stay out of that for sure. So what about so plants have a lot of cameras and things like this too, right? How helpful are those in your investigation process?
Very helpful, actually, as long as the cameras are in those critical areas where they need to be. And you may remember I talked about that on one of our previous food safety chats, that you don't need 1,000 cameras in your facility. If you only had a budget that had 60 or 40 cameras, ask somebody like me. I'll tell you where to put those cameras, because I know where it's going to happen, especially if it comes to product tampering. I mean, I can walk through your plant. I don't know if this is good or bad, but I can walk through your plant and I can tell you, folks, where somebody's going to try to tamper with your product. I've been doing this so long. I mean, I can just tell you where somebody's going to try to tamper with your product. A couple of things I can tell you where they're going to try to tamper with your product, and I can tell you if you're going to have a workplace incident, such as an active shooter, I can tell you where it's going to happen in your facility. I can tell you that just from walking through your plant. And then I can tell you the mitigation strategies, the countermeasures to put in place to try to reduce whatever risk that may exist. And that's more important, that that you have, if you do have cameras, great. Are they in the right places? Do we have the security measures that's going to keep our people safe? And that's what matters at the end of the day, Brian, we all stay safe. I always listen to your introduction, and you always say this is non-competitive, and you're 100% spot on. And I really hope people heard that when you said that, because what we're talking about, there's no competition. Look, we're out here to help each other. And whether it's food safety or whether it's food defense. And that's why I've always told people, if you have a situation and it's a real situation and you need some assistance, call us. Don't worry about what it's going to cost. And look, we got to take care of that situation. We'll worry about the cost later. And I really mean that. And I know you share that same sentiment, Brian, because at the end of the day, it's about keeping each other safe and secure.
Yep, 100%. So let's kind of bring this up to the 30,000 foot level. And I'm on this food safety chat, and I'm listening to everything, just a fire hose of information you're giving here, Rod. And I'm sitting back now and saying, oh, okay, great. All right, I know I got this problem. Where do I start? What's a good place to start?
I would say a good place to start, believe it or not, I'm not trying to advertise, is to attend the course that I have coming up in March, because it's going to give you a lot of good information to take back and you can actually put into process as far as conducting your investigation, the initial things that you should do. And then if you have any other questions, you can always email me and things like that, at no charge. I'd be more than happy to help out. But those are some of the places that I would start, making sure that if you do conduct background checks, there's a certain way that you want to conduct that background check. Now, that's another whole hour discussion, believe it or not. You may recall I said that in the last food safety chat, that we're not doing background checks the right way in the United States. There's so many ways to pass a background check. I mean, I could pass a background. I can give you a person that has a criminal record a mile long, and I can show you how they can pass a background check, and it'll come up clean as a daisy. Clean as a daisy. There's a certain way to do it, and I'll show you that in my course. But if you don't come to the course, don't worry about it. But there's still things you can do initially, at least when you start your own investigation. Take statements, take proper statements. Make sure you don't force anybody or accuse anybody or coerce anybody into saying what you want them to say. You never want to do those things. You always want to approach an investigation with an open mind. Don't go into an investigation with tunnel vision. Well, I know this is the guy that did it, so I'm going to really drill him. No. That's not how you do it. You'd be surprised, believe it or not. It could be somebody altogether different that you would have never believed. And I'll just conclude. I know we only have about 3 more minutes, but let me just conclude with this one last quick story. I promise this is quick. I got a call from a company in Massachusetts, right? And they said, we've been finding glass over in our vat, one of our vats. Now, this company produces high-end soups for like major restaurants, right? And they found 4 incidents of glass. So I immediately go up there to start the investigation. And I asked the plant management, I said, who all knows about this? They said, well, we went around the plant and we asked everybody if they knew anything about this. First of all, I told them this is not what you do. You want it to be a surprise to people. But they said, we're really happy for this one guy named Jason, because if it wasn't for Jason, who's a part of the sanitation crew, this glass would have made it through the process and got out. Jason was the one that discovered the glass in all 4 incidents. Thank God for Jason. Well, to me as an investigator, I find that a little peculiar. Why Jason is the only one that finds the glass. Come to find out, and I'll just conclude here, and I'm missing a lot of the story, but I know we don't have time. Come to find out, Jason has been trying to get a promotion within the organization. Jason is the one who's been planting the glass in the vats and finding it himself. So now the company was about to promote Jason because they're so thankful that he's been finding the glass, but he's the one that's been planting the glass. And the way that I found that out about him, when I interviewed him real quickly, I said, Jason, I found out who's been putting the glass in the vat. He said, you did? I said, yeah. He said, who? And I said, look up at that exit sign. He looked up at the exit sign. I said, do you see the T, the letter T? He said, yeah. I said, where that vat is, where you found the glass, there's a small pinhole camera there. Now, there's not a small pinhole camera there, but he thought it was. He looked at it closely. He said, "Is it?" I said, yeah. And then he put his head down, and I asked him, I said, why did you do it? He said, because I've been trying to get a raise.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, so the analogy, I'm probably dating myself here, but yeah, for interviewing, right? I always remember the old detective show Columbo, right?
Yeah.
He always got his guy, and he was never confrontational, right? He was always all, I have a question here. Can you explain this to me? I don't quite understand this, right? And he would get the bad guys helping him to solve the crime because he was so good at interviewing, right? So yeah, you don't have to be confrontational. So wow, I mean, I said this earlier, but it's true, right? What a fire hose of information. Thank you, Rod. This is amazing. And I'm going to put here in the comments. So one of the things that we have in the locals group, right, is we have conversations around topics like this, right? So locals is a free community where we can talk about these topics. And there's a membership area where we share additional information as well. And one of the things that I'm going to be doing with this, right, is I tried to pull up some websites here while we were talking, the FDA debarment list, the Social Security number validator. I'm going to be going back through this chat and putting a lot of that information into locals so that we can start building out this database too. And come March, you're going to see me in the audience at your class because this is gold. Absolutely good
for other people, and it's really good.
Oh, beautiful. Any closing thoughts here, Rod, as we finish out today?
No, I appreciate it as always, Brian. And you know, with that SSN validator, you can start off by checking your own Social Security number, and you'll see it works. It works really good, but don't pay for it. Again, it's free, so don't pay for it. But you know, I appreciate the opportunity to join you as always, and keep up the good work that you do. Sometimes I can't make it every Friday, but I record it, right? I record it and go back. You know what? I always learn things, and as long as I've been working with the food industry, and this is the honest truth, I always learn something new with this food safety chat. And to me, it's awesome. So thank you so much for what you do, and also for trying to keep our nation safe.
Well, thank you. So everybody, that's a great plug for my promotion here at the end, right? Is we do this every Friday, right? So we'll be back here next Friday as well. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern for the next food safety chat. And again, as Rod said, right, this is an investment of your time. And if you're only able to pull one new piece of information out of these chats to make yourself a little bit better in what you do, mission accomplished, right? And the chat today, right? There's multiple things. I know in this, like, there's just a ton of information that I'm going to pull out of this. And I'm excited about that, right? Because that means I'm growing and learning. And that's why we do this. So we're very happy to share this information and glad that you were here. And we will see you back here next week. So thanks again, Rod, my friend. And everybody have a great weekend. And we'll see you back here next Friday. Bye.